Hey, hi everybody. Bill MacPhee back here with you, and we're with Mental Wellness Today presents Recovery Blog with Bill MacPhee. And today I have a special guest with me. This is Peter Stuart. Say hi, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
So, listen, I wanted to have Peter on this blog because I want to first tell you how I met Peter. Peter was actually new to the Niagara region here, where I live in Port Erie, and Peter actually moved from Montreal. But one day, Peter just came in and knocked on the office door and walked in and said, "Is Bill around?" And so I took Peter to the office, and we talked for a while. And he said, Bill, he says, I just moved to Port Colborne, and I've been a subscriber to your magazine for quite a while, and Port Erie is closed, so I come in. And so we met with Peter and had some talking, uh, introducing, and different things like that. And I really respect that. I really, really like when people just drop in the office unexpectedly and say he's a manager in or something like that. It's really kind of neat. I really like that. And that's what Peter did. So then we invited Peter back, the staff here, for some of his insight into mental illness and schizophrenia and different things like that. And so we had an editorial meeting and that. But I got to know Peter quite well, and we meet on a regular basis, go out for coffee, and we try to solve the world's problems, eh? Hey, Peter. So that's how I know Peter. But I know that I want to give him a chance to introduce himself to you, a little bit about his background. And then we're going to go through a series of questions and answers in an interview that will be hopefully enlightening, and that Peter can share some of his wisdom with me. And as you know, my definition of recovery is when you wouldn't want to be anybody else but who you are today. So, Peter, give us a little bit about your background. I think you grew up in Montreal, right? So tell us a little bit about
Born
that.
in Montreal and grew up in Quebec City. 1964, my family was in Montreal, in the west end of Montreal, in Pointe Claire, where my dad had a job with IBM. He was a technician, and he eventually got promoted to middle management, and that's what brought us to Quebec City. So I grew up in Quebec City, and basically from all appearances, we were, a normal middle class suburban family and so forth. Devout Catholics and everything, and very spiritual and so forth. And I had three siblings that I'm still very close with. And but I didn't know at that time that I had a genetic predisposition to mental health problems
Mm-hmm.
because, yeah.
Then I just want to take it back a little bit. We'll get into that, but I just want to ask you, just for our viewers who are in North America or around the world, Quebec, Montreal, where Peter lived, is French community. So, is French was French your first language? Is that your first language?
No, English.
Oh,
English is my first language, but I mean, I'm of mixed ancestry. My father was half French Canadian and half Scottish ancestry, and his first language was French, and his second language was English, and he had a Scottish name. And my mother was half French Canadian, and the other half was Irish and English, and she had a
okay.
French Canadian family name, but her first language was English, and her second language was French. So we grew up in Quebec City in a mostly French speaking environment, but English was the language at home.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And so you went to school then in how many years in Montreal did you go to school? Since you're what grade did you start there
Well,
for?
I never made it to school in Montreal because I was only 4 years old when we moved from Montreal. So all I remember of Montreal was our house in Pointe Claire and the next door neighbor's place and our street and so forth. And I really only started school and at age 5 in kindergarten when I moved to Quebec City in 1968. So I really have no recollections of school in Montreal. Schooling started in Quebec City, all in French,
Okay.
in the Catholic public system in Quebec City. Kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, and 4 in French, and then my parents, for whatever reason, felt I'd learned enough French. I was bilingual enough, so they sent me to English language Catholic school. And then after I started having problems with my daily functioning, I was sent to a Protestant school, which back then that's how the system was in the province of Quebec. It was either Catholic or Protestant.
But I sort of lost you there in a minute. Where you said your conditions are, what condition were you starting? Your mental illness started?
Yeah, well,
that young?
yeah,
How old were you?
well,
Really?
I was 12 years old when I started having problems with the mental health condition. It was
Oh.
1976. I was 12 years old and I started having problems with depression. It started in the 7th grade, and I started having problems. I was able to get by high school, but it was difficult functioning to be able to make friends, and I had difficulty. I went through all throughout high school having basically no friends and being what I guess you could call a floater kind of person, being kind of like on the margins of the social scene in high school, not having any really friends that I could say that this person is my friend or that person is my friend, and you know, being on the margins of all, like in high school, like as I'm sure you know, it's all these little cliques and gangs, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was never part of a social group. I was never part of a gang in high school, and I was sort of on the periphery of all of the gangs, but never a member of any of them.
Right.
So that's how I was throughout high school, and that continued in community college as well.
And that's probably why you have such a good relationship with your siblings and all that, because you're a tight family, because you didn't have other kind of people.
That's right. My family and my church environment were basically my biggest social support network, as opposed to school. School was not a very positive environment for me.
Right. So you probably enjoyed being an adult a lot better than you were a kid.
Definitely not. Teenage years were not the good years. The only good years that I remember about being a teenager was, I guess you could say, athletics, which helped me get through the school experience, and church, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Peter, I want to talk a little bit about that. Well, you know what? I'm going to start off before I go into that. So, did you actually have a diagnosis then, and are you have insight into your illness? Talk a little bit about your illness, and you know, if you were diagnosed with something, or just talk a little bit about understanding. Do you have insight into your illness?
Well,
let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I have insight now into my illness, but back then I did not. I knew that there was something wrong when I was 12 years old. I was constantly sad, and I felt like I had a gray cloud over my head, and that there was constantly something. Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel as if I don't want to get up in the morning? Why do I feel as if nobody likes me and I don't want to live, and all this kind of stuff? And I also had kind of like the beginnings of I guess you could say paranoid ideation when I was as young as 8, 12, 9 years old. I had these kind of apocalyptic illusions, not illusions, but visions when I was 8 and 9 years old of the end of the world and all this kind of stuff. These were kind of apocalyptic visions that I had.
Right.
And so when I was 12 years old, this started to get worse, but nobody ever diagnosed me, and I never diagnosed myself. I just knew that I felt bad, and so I started to self-medicate when I was 15 years old in the 9th grade, and started to seek out the solution of alcohol and controlled substances, specifically marijuana and hashish, to try and escape the bad feeling that I was feeling inside of me by getting into an altered state.
Right. And then I guess though that probably spiraled down, and that made things worse eventually. Is that correct?
Initially it made things quote unquote better, in the sense that I was able to escape temporarily from what I was feeling. But it quickly spiraled out of control, in the sense that it went from a recreational, occasional type of behavior, and to after I flunked out of community college after 2 years trying to get a pre-university community college diploma, the depression was sufficiently bad even at that time that I was not able to complete my community college studies. So I ended up basically in and out of the labor force, and in and out of other institutions of higher learning, trying to continue my life, trying to move forward, but constantly coming up against the barrier of the depression and the well, I guess we call it in the terminology premorbid phase of psychosis, basically leading up to a psychosis, having these delusional symptoms that kept on getting bigger, and not being able to function, and turning increasingly to substance abuse to escape from this.
Right. Now, when you were younger, Peter, a teenager and everything like that, were you able to work? Did you have part-time jobs or so when school was out? How was that for you?
Yeah, that was, in a way, it was a lifesaver. It was very much a way to stay on track. Starting in the 6th grade, I had a paper route because we were a middle class family, and it was expected of us to go to university, and it was always drilled into us that dad is the only breadwinner in the house, and mom is staying home to raise us until 20 years later into the marriage, where she got a part-time job. But basically, we were all expected to have paper routes so that we could save up to go to university. And then in community college, I worked part-time on the weekends at a video arcade as a money changer. And during community college, I also had summer jobs working for as a demographer for a community organization doing the language study for the local English-speaking community.
Very good.
So work was definitely in the picture. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about, okay, so now we met, I don't know how long ago, quite a while ago, and when you moved back to Port Colborne. Talk a little bit about the move now, why you're in Quebec and now you're in Port Colborne. Tell a little bit about
Well,
why
I being in Quebec City was rather difficult, being a native English speaker in an all French environment, despite the fact that my level of bilingualism is very high. When you have an English sounding name in Quebec City, everyone automatically assumes that you're not from the province of Quebec, and you quite often you get I guess you could say treated like an outsider in some respects, especially if you live outside of Montreal, where there's more English speaking people. And in Quebec City, there's only 2% English speaking people. And so it's difficult to live in the English language in Quebec City and live in a vibrant community. So I found it difficult finding gainful employment with an English sounding name, plus having a mental health condition, plus a substance abuse problem. I had a tendency to go drift from pillar to post from one low paying job to another. So I ended up, once I initially recovered from my condition briefly for 3 years, went to Ottawa to get a bachelor's degree, hoping to get into journalism or politics. But my mother got sick subsequent to my graduation, and I ended up coming back to Quebec City to look after her. And once I looked after her for 7 years and worked part-time throughout her illness, once she passed away, I found myself in basically my hometown with very little job opportunity, very little future ahead of me. Both my parents being passed away, all 3 of my siblings living in English Canada, and very little future ahead of me apart from, basically having to make the choice to leave my hometown and move closer to my siblings, two of whom live in the Greater Toronto, Niagara region. So I decided to move here.
Yeah, very good, very good. Yeah, so that moves on what I want to ask you then now. So you're back in Port Colborne, your one brother lives here, your others are in the Niagara region in Toronto. I want to just let people know about relationships. Another pillar of our 6 pillars of recovery is based on relationships, and our goal in relationships is to basically bring the best out in people, to create encouragers and be encouraging rather than the opposite of that. And I want to tell you a story. Peter's not going to tell you that I'm going to tell this story, but it just shows how much that relationships are important and how to develop them. I know that in this past, the federal election here in Canada was, how long ago was it?
2011.
2011. Yeah. And Peter's been making efforts to socialize within the community and everything like that. And Peter joined the Knights of Columbus, which is I don't know, the subsidizing, or it's like a
Catholic organization.
Knights of Columbus. And Peter was looking for work, and Peter made some good connections within there. And at election time, Peter was talking to a fella, about looking for part-time work, looking for some odd jobs, different things like that. And this fella told him, he said, well, Peter, I'll tell you what. Go down to this address at a certain time today, and look for this woman, and ask her, and say, I'm looking for a scrutineer job. For voting, can you give me a position? And so Peter went down there, and he met up with this lady, and he said, "Hi, I'm Peter Stuart. I understand you're looking for a some workers, some help for the election." And so Peter got hired on the spot, and it turned out that the guy who sent Peter over to the woman was the woman's husband, and he belonged to the night. So that's like that networking and that socializing and doing that. But the point is that unlike maybe your childhood where you're very isolated and everything like that, you're making an effort to develop relationships, and that's a perfect example of networking and how you did that to get that job, and you're still friends with the people in the nights and everything like that. So that's about relationships in that pillar, developing those relationships with people and outside and everything like that. Peter, we talked a little bit about family. I know that you mentioned a lot about your family. Let's go into. I want to talk a little bit about mental and physical health. Those two topics, and we know the goal in our Bright Future program. The goal in mental health and physical health is that we should want to live as healthy as possible and as long as possible. And Peter, let's talk a little bit about the first part, the physical stuff. And I think that it's really good. I'm very envious of you and appreciate all your hard work, because Peter lost a lot of weight. He was very, you weren't obese or anything, but you were heavy. You're on the heavy side. I'm on the heavy side, but you were there, and you set a goal. You wanted to get in shape and to lose some weight. And so talk about that, and you're succeeding. I mean, I meet with you, every couple of weeks or whatever, and every time I notice you're dropping down. So let's talk a little bit about physical health. What are you doing these days with your physical health?
Well, physically, I have to keep in shape because, as a lot of us know, taking this medication for mental health conditions, it slows down our metabolism and it causes us to gain weight. And the first medication that I took for what I have, it's schizoaffective disorder. It didn't necessarily make me gain all that much weight, but when I changed medications to a different medication, I gained 90 pounds. And I bloated up to 265 pounds. And I had to take specific measures to address that issue. And I had to get blood work to find out what was going on with my thyroid gland. I had to get on thyroid medication to pump up my thyroid gland to get my metabolism stimulated. I had to make a conscious effort to reduce my food intake because I was a person who had a natural tendency to like sweets. I've always had a sweet tooth. So I had to make a conscious choice to cut down and eventually cut out virtually anything that has refined sugar in it.
Yeah,
so I cut out all of the cookies, the brownies, the banana bread, the muffins.
Sugar is our enemy.
Sugar is our enemy. Yeah, basically I cut because I was headed directly towards type 2 diabetes. I was almost at the +5 in the sugar count, the blood glucose count. Now I'm at something like 2 or something like that. I'm really good. The only sugar that I have in my diet, refined sugar, is the little bit that you can find in deli meats and other prepared foods that have a little bit of refined sugar in it, like condiments, like ketchup and stuff like that. So I have very little refined sugar in my diet. I don't drink any soda pop, no diet soda pop. The only yogurt that I eat is yogurt that has artificial sweetener in it. So I'm very, very rigorous with cutting out refined sugar and cutting down on carbohydrates. I now eat totally sugar-free. We call it Ezekiel bread. It's imported from California. I pay double the price for it, but it's worth it because it's got zero sugar in it. And any carbohydrate that I normally eat, meaning pasta, bread, rice, and that kind of thing, I'd say I cut down my portions by 25 to 35%.
Yeah, and as we know from other videos and my videos, now you'll see that with weight loss or getting into physical health. You have the eating the right things, you have exercising, you have portion control, and you have that planning and support that you have to do.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about exercising now, since we mentioned that, because I know that you've also dropped weight by exercising. You're doing a lot of walking, right?
Yeah, I walk easily anywhere between 30 to 90 minutes of walking per day. On average, I'd say I walk about 45 minutes per day. But I can walk anywhere between, I can easily walk sometimes 90 minutes a day, sometimes 120 minutes a day. And it's rapid, brisk walking. And I integrate it into my routine. I don't necessarily set a separate time to go for a walk. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But quite often, what I'm doing right now, and I'm a student at Niagara College, and we have a parking program where we can park our car at the local mall in a designated parking spot to save on having to get a parking pass, pay $255 for 9 months of parking. So I park at the mall and I walk 15 minutes, 15 minutes in one direction and 15 minutes back, and I walk everywhere on campus. So that gives me my 30 minutes of walking during the day, and I also quite often on the weekends take 45, 90 minutes of walking, and in the summertime take my bicycle. In the wintertime I have a stationary bicycle in my room, in my guest room, and I do free weights, arm curls and stuff like that, and push-ups and sit-ups. So
good for you. Now, I want to mention too that Peter hasn't only been doing this like for a couple of weeks or 4 weeks or a couple of months. You've been doing this for like, I think, has it been a year yet?
Oh, several years.
Yeah, and it's paid off, and you got that stick-to-itiveness. You were able to do that continuous without stopping or backsliding and all that, right?
I've lost 75 pounds.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I'm at 190 now. I was at.
That's we talked about the physical aspect of that, of the things you're doing losing weight. Let's talk now about the mental, the emotional, the psychological stuff. Like, I think that I was kind of really stood out when we were talking a couple of weeks ago. How Peter, I was asking him, do you find the urge to eat a lot at home, and he's studying and all that, and he said, Bill, he says, really what helped me with that is keeping my hands occupied. You were saying that was a trick. It was, because he always nibbled or grabbed this, grabbed that out of here and eating, right? But you said that, and I know that you're a spiritual person, you're Roman Catholic, but Peter was saying he would use the rosary when he's praying and everything, or just hold it. And what that did is it kept his hands busy. It kept your hands busy. That allowed you to not to wander and go pick something else to eat rather than doing something. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought that was a great coping mechanism, a great planning strategy, a great supporting strategy, and I thought that was very neat. Talk about your emotional side of things, like when you want to eat, or the things that you haven't done to stop that, or your routine, or sort of your system for that.
Well, emotionally, like from the point of view of the rosary, that's part of being a knight. They encourage you to have a devotion to the rosary. So I integrated that with my weight loss strategy, and my weight loss maintenance strategy is that to, like you say, to occupy your hands. I used to be a cigarette smoker as well, so I also needed to change that pattern of having a cigarette in my hand. So I needed to focus on something to channel that anxiety of wanting to put something in my hand into my mouth. So I focused on the rosary. Like, I go to mass every day in the morning, and the rosary is something that we say a half an hour before mass, right around the time when I'm having a hankering for a meal. So as a meal substitute, or as a way of putting off that next meal, challenging my hunger, challenging my desire to succumb to have food right away, I'll put off that hankering for my next meal by focusing on the spiritual aspect of handling the rosary beads and saying the Our Father and saying the 10 Hail Marys 5 times over, and then the different prayers that go along with that. And then that occupies a half an hour, then a half an hour with the celebration of the Eucharist. Then that basically puts off, that delays the taking of my next meal by another hour. So I'm able to cope in that way, in that respect. So it's a good coping mechanism.
Very good, very good. And so you're doing a really good job with that. Very good, and that's part of the planning and the support and everything like that. Before before we get into what you're doing now and also what you've accomplished with, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but talk a little bit about your substance abuse and the fact how you've been going to AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and that, and how that's been a great support, and a little bit of that philosophy, and maybe touch a little bit about not only with that issue there, but how it plays out when you have a mental illness as well.
Well, the two go hand in hand because addictions and mental health conditions quite often are doubled up with each other. Increasingly in the healthcare system here in Canada and also in the States, they're doubling up. They're twinning the treatment of mental health and addictions together, and I'm noticing that more and more. And I've noticed that with myself. My mental health condition was basically a segue to my addiction because I started self-medicating with alcohol and drugs as a way of escaping the fact that I felt so lousy. So I never realized that I was doing that initially until I got the awareness of that through just basically being aware of it by doing it, and that it started off quite in small measures by having a few beers here and there. But basically it rapidly degenerated because the first time I ever got in an altered state with alcohol, basically I got pretty in an advanced state of inebriation, which did not go all that bad. In fact, I got very good attention from my teammates on my hockey team because we were on a hockey trip. But the second time I tried it, I got basically very badly inebriated, and it was at a school dance, and I broke a window, and I ended up basically vomiting outside the window of the vice principal's car, being driven home by the vice principal, and my parents following mortified in back. And so basically that laid the groundwork for a drinking and using career, which lasted over about 20 years. So basically I thought that I could control this urge to sort of medicate myself, but basically I felt so lousy getting up every day, even without substances, that I felt that I did not have any kind of medication to control the symptoms, and I didn't know that I could get medication. I was unaware that there was such a thing as antidepressants or antipsychotics that could even help me get with it well, so that I naturally had a tendency to turn to controlled and uncontrolled substances to try and escape into this reality of unreality, that I would try and escape at any opportunity that I could possibly imagine, so as to basically get away from the real world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what was the essence of it.
Very good. Now you've been sober now for, what do you celebrate? I forget what you call it.
I'm going on 16 years
16
now.
years. Well,
16 years. Yeah.
Wow.
But I had to hit bottom first before.
Well, that in a lot of cases that's very true with people dealing with mental illness, physical, or with mental illness and addictions and things like that. And it's like a basketball. Sometimes it has to drop all the way down and hit the floor, hit rock bottom before it can bounce back up. And you'd say that's what's happened in your case.
Definitely, yeah. I had to be basically beaten into submission and basically try every single avenue other than the right one before I chose the right avenue, and basically wound up basically at God's feet, basically saying, well, here I am, God, and do with me what you would like to do with me. And basically and I found myself totally bereft of any other resource but to turn to God and ask for help.
And that's in our Bright Future program, that the spirituality is the number one pillar. I think it's the most where we got to recognize that there is a God, and then also say that God is for me and not against me.
That's right.
I think we really got to understand that. Peter, I want to move on. I want to move on to what you're doing now with you mentioned you're going to school now. Let's talk a little bit about that. How's that going? You started in September, and give us a brief update on how's school going.
Well, school is going great. I'm in the first semester of a 2-year program at Niagara College Welland campus here in Welland, Ontario, and it's called the Social Service Worker Program. It's a 2-year vocational program leading to directly to the job market, to be sort of like an entry level social service worker in social services to help with people with either addictions or mental health problems, or helping women who have suffered spousal violence, or single mothers who are experiencing poverty, things like that, or senior citizens. My particular focus is with senior citizens, since I was a caregiver to my mother and to my grandmother, and since I experienced addictions and mental health concerns, I wanted to work in that. And I also want to, I'm taking it one day at a time, of course, but I want to, if that program is successful, to move on to the university level and take a Bachelor of Social Work and maybe even a Master's of Social Work.
You know what? I know that we talked about this before, not on camera here, but you told me before, when you were getting ready to go to school and start and everything like that, that you got binders and you got flip tabs, all everything like that. You really organized yourself. Let's talk about that organization. What did you do to make things simpler for you, and so you're organized, so you don't get overwhelmed, and talk a little bit about that.
Well, Bill, that's crucial, because in past times, when I just graduated from high school and went directly to community college in the pre-university program in Quebec City, I was not prepared. I had a binder and it had tabs in it, but I did not have good study habits, and I did not really organize myself. I did not prep very well for the lectures. And this time around, I'm a lot more organized, even more organized than I was when I was a mature student going to university in 93 to 96. This time around, everything's done on the computer. All our lecture notes are on the computer. You can download your lecture notes ahead of time. And in my case, I do not have a laptop, so I have two different binders. One binder has all the lecture notes that I print out off the computer onto hard copy. So I have all the lecture notes that the prof prepares for us in advance. I read them ahead of time before going to class, so I know what the prof is going to be talking about ahead of time. My other binder is for taking handwritten notes in class, and they're all divided by course subject. And I also do 3 hours of homework before going to school every morning. School starts anywhere between 10:30 a.m. Or 12:30 p.m. or 1:30 p.m. and goes as late as 6:20. And I usually get up around 3 a.m., sometimes even 2 a.m., 2:30 a.m., 4 a.m., and do 3 hours of homework before getting my assignments done. I quite often I act proactively. I do my assignments before they're due, those kinds of things, and make sure I read up on what the assignment is about before doing it. And make sure I know. I also have a paper agenda where I write down ahead of time, before the semester even starts. Once I get all the course outlines and the teaching and learning plan, I write down every single deadline that's coming up for every single assignment in my agenda, so I know what exactly all my deadlines are. And I write down 1 to 2 weeks before the deadline comes up what I should be working on before that deadline comes up, so I'm not caught with my pants down when that deadline comes up. These are all tricks that I learned throughout the years.
And you know what that's called, don't you?
I don't know.
It's called planning.
Planning.
Remember, with our physical, the part of our physical health, that support and planning, and Peter did that. Now, Peter, I'm assuming that when you decided to go to school and you wanted to go back, that you probably had a little bit of anxiety, or you're probably fearful, or unaware of what's going to happen and everything like that. If there's a person out there, a young man, young woman, or older man, older woman, who wants to go back to school, or is thinking about going back, and but doesn't really, what would you tell them? What can you encourage them and say about that?
Well, what I would tell to that person is definitely go for it. I mean, you have the ability, even though you're probably thinking that you have doubts in your mind. Definitely don't underestimate yourself. I still have a tendency to underestimate myself and undervalue myself and have problems with self-esteem. Do not underestimate yourself. Probably, I have a priest friend, my pastor back home in Quebec City, where I just moved from a year ago, said the anticipation is usually much worse than the participation. So, being as someone with schizoaffective disorder, I have big problems with anxiety. So usually being keyed up before the event is usually a big problem. But usually if you prepare ahead of time, get all your ducks lined up, make sure it's better to over prepare than to under prepare. So that's what I have a tendency to do as a mature student, being 50 years old and returning to school. So I've had a tendency to basically over prepare, and it's much better to over prepare than to under prepare, and not that kind of thing.
Well, we're going to wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so,
Sure.
but I just wanted to jump again to your books. Peter has actually written a couple books. Peter, share a little bit about that. Share a little bit about, when we talk about one of the pillars, the fifth pillar is, having career, vocation, or volunteering in that, or doing something that you have passion for. And Peter has some passion for certain literature, and he wrote a couple. So I'll give you a plug here, Peter. Talk a little bit about your books, what you've done.
Well, sure. I have two books that I wrote. One is called right over here, The Catholic Faith and the Social Construction of Religion, which I co-wrote with my pastor back in Quebec City. His name is Father Alan Savage of St. Patrick's Parish in Quebec City. Basically, I was wanting to get out into the public domain for the first time because I'd been writing and blogging for over 10 years before that. I'd managed to get onto a blog on WordPress previous to that because my first goal previous to getting into social work had been wanting to be an elected official in politics in the federal government for one of the big political parties in Ottawa in Canada. And but because my mother had gotten sick and my segue into politics being journalism kind of tanked when print journalism got basically wiped out off the face of the earth, basically because of the internet. Basically, I found myself back home in Quebec City looking after my mother, but still having a desire to write, have my opinions about social, religious, and political issues being brought into the public forum, but not feeling as if I had the way to do it. So basically what I got involved with is I got onto WordPress. And then when I moved, got a job at my local church, I met Father Savage, and he is a published author, having written several books, and he said that he could help me publish my first book. So we co-wrote this book called The Catholic Faith and the Social Construction of Religion, where we basically each wrote a section, critiqued each other's section, and then counter-critiqued each other's section. And then I added some of my blog articles, and basically it talks about how religion is socially constructed, and also the issue of faith in secular society in the province of Quebec, as well as linguistic and cultural issues.
Peter, before you go on to your next book that you're going to use, I just wanted to make a point here. You mentioned that you said you asked for help from your old pastor and everything like that. And I want to encourage people. You know what? It's part of the relationships pillar is that no one is an island. Nobody does it by themselves. But if you reach out to somebody and ask for somebody's help, most people, 9 out of 10 times, somebody's going to give you that help or say, I will help you. And that's what exactly you did there. That's part of relationships. That's where you're thriving as an adult because your relationships are getting bigger and knowing what's going on. So let's talk about your other book you wrote.
Yeah, the second book that I wrote, Bill, is called 21st Century Schizoid Man. Basically, it's called One Man's Story of Life, Loss, and Redemption Through God's Grace. Basically, it's my personal, my autobiography. I felt I had that story in me for a long time. I kept recounting it to myself in my inner dialogue for many years. So around 2010, I finally said, I'm going to commit it to paper, and we'll see where it goes. And I'll try and find either a publisher or a self-published tool to get it published. So again, once I got it, all the manuscript all done, I submitted it to for vetting to my 3 siblings and got their feedback and made some adjustments based on what they had told me. And then submitted it, spoke about it to Father Savage, and he helped me out once again get it published on Create Space, the publishing arm of Amazon. And it's in publication. The first book that I mentioned is available on Thomas Nelson, Westbow Press, and the second book, 21st Century Schizoid Man, is available on Amazon on Create Space. So it's all about my personal journey, how I basically what we've been talking about, how I started out in relatively normal family, but nevertheless went off track and have since recovered.
Very good. Now, Peter, before we go, is there anything that you'd like, any words of wisdom or something that you'd like to share that's profound or anything, or did we pretty well
Well,
cover that?
never be afraid of asking for help, and never think that you're alone in this journey, in this struggle that you've got, because the more that you reach out, the more it says in the Bible, the measure that you give is the measure that you will receive. And in computers, they call that GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If what you put into life is garbage, what you'll get out is garbage. If you put good stuff into life, you'll get good stuff.
Very good. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on Mental Wellness Today presents Recovery Blog with Bill MacPhee. And before we go, I just want to let you know that if you wanted to email me, if you wanted to know more about Peter's books or anything like that, just email me at bmacphee@magpiemags.com, and I will forward the email to Peter. As well, Peter's plugging his book. I'm going to plug mine. So then I have my book here too. It's my biography, To Cry a Dry Tear, Bill MacPhee's Journey of Hope and Recovery with Schizophrenia, as well as we have a documentary that was called Life After Mental Illness, and we have our SZ magazine that this is just not too long off the press there. So anyways, that's enough about us. So really appreciate you being here. And ask to spread this out on social media. Let's get a lot of people to subscribe to my blog. I'll have interesting guests. Actually, today is Friday, the 3rd of October, 2014. I'm flying tomorrow. I'll be in Wichita, Kansas, speaking on Sunday night. If you're interested in having me learn more about having me come to your organization for a speaking engagement, feel free to email me once again at bmacphee@magpiemags.com. And again, recovery is when you wouldn't want to be anybody else but who you are today.
Right on.
And remember, there is life after mental illness. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.